The International Migrants Day comes this year in very important and interesting circumstances. The world will celebrate in 2010 the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the International Convention on the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, a comprehensive convention on the rights of migrant workers, all migrant workers, which brings together the human rights provided for in the different instruments of human rights, which builds on the ILO conventions. 2009 is the 60th anniversary of the adoption of the first ILO Convention on Migrant Workers, the 1949 Convention number 97 on Migration for Employment revised. This is the 60th anniversary. This year, the International Migrants Day comes at a time that we can look back with more information, with a degree of analysis that has been undertaken, including by the ILO, on the impact of the crisis on migrant workers. Last year, the crisis had just broken out. We were estimating what would happen. Now we have more information. And finally, the International Migrants Day this year is celebrated, in fact, in the same week where the conference on the environment is closing its deliberations in Copenhagen, and environmental change is expected to have consequences for habitat, and therefore it is expected to produce movements of population and migration, and there is a great deal that the international institutional system can do to assist member states facing up to the challenges these movements represent. The International Convention, the 1990 International Convention, is one of three conventions on migrant workers. The 1990 Convention has built upon the two ILO conventions on migrant workers, the 1949 Convention and the 1975 Convention. The International Labour Conference in 2004 considered that these three conventions were complementary and called on the office to make use of the three conventions in its work. So obviously we are for the provisions in these conventions as much as we are for the ILO conventions, and we think that the three of them provide a legal framework for national policies, for national laws on migration. Many assumptions were made when the crisis broke out. One thing that we have witnessed is that migrant workers have borne the cost of the crisis more than native workers in the countries where they were employed. This is a general and applicable statements in all countries of destinations. Now, if you look closely at different cases, you will see different images emerging. In some countries, the impact has been very severe. You have had unemployment rates of migrant workers much higher than the unemployment rate of native workers. You have had the growth of unemployment of migrant workers much higher than that of native workers. Now, in some countries where economic growth was not severely affected by the crisis, the consequence was that migrant workers were not that affected, or at least were not as affected as in the first set of countries. So the result also is that remittances, one indicator of the impact of labor migration, positive or negative, remittances in some cases, in some regions have grown, have not receded, have grown. Migration to South Asia, for instance, have grown considerably. Theory says that. Says that in times of crisis, remittances grow, but they have grown at rates totally unexpected, which means that they play a function which goes beyond that of stabilizing and making up for the drop in incomes of families in countries of origin. But you also have other places where you have had a very tragic drop in remittances, and in countries that have a very high dependence on remittances. And this is the case, for instance, in Central Asia. You have countries which have reliance that goes over 40% of their GDP on remittances, and these have been affected severely. We have witnessed instances of hostility to migrant workers, or hostility and xenophobia towards migrant workers, and this has been very disturbing. It's very troubling, it's very worrying in a world that is interconnected, when there is a need for migrant workers, and where migrant workers deserve protection, protection that is proportionate to the contribution they make to their countries of employment. If you have desertification, you have economic processes which come to halt. People move. People move within the same country, or probably across international borders. And when they move across international borders, they engage in economic activities. So these economic activities have to be organized. These economic activities have to be created. They have to be regulated. And this is a role for labor administrations, and for labor law, and hence, of course, a great important role and function for the ILO. If I talk about desertification, I can talk also about surfaces, territories that might be flooded with water as a result of climate change, as a result of global warming. There again, the flows of migrants that might result of such warming will put an end to economic processes and would be at the origin of new economic processes. Economic processes mean work, mean employment, mean conditions of work, conditions of employment, and therefore a great, very important role for the ILO in assisting member states, assisting tripartite constituents in facing up to the consequences of these movements.